My name is Lila. I'm 45, an illustrator living in a quiet neighborhood just outside Portland. My life has always been wrapped in soft light, watercolor mornings, sketchbook afternoons, tea on the porch beside blooming rose bushes. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. That illusion shattered on a Tuesday that began like any other. I had just finished adding the final brush strokes to a children's book about a rabbit named Milo when I heard the front door open. I looked up expecting to see Ben, my husband of 17 years, returning from his business trip. Instead, I saw him standing there stiffly, an envelope in his hand. And then, God, I wish I could unsee it. Renee walked in behind him, her hand looped around his elbow, her smile calm and smug like she belonged there. Renee, my best friend since high school, my maid of honor, the woman who once whispered secrets during sleepovers and promised we'd grow old laughing over wine. She stood beside my husband like she'd won a prize. Ben dropped the envelope on the kitchen counter. "These are divorce papers," he said, flat and cold. "Sign them. And starting next month, I'll expect $90,000 a month from you. You don't work anyway." I didn't blink. Not at the numbers, not at the insult, not even at Renee. Something cracked inside, but nothing showed on my face. My fingers reached for the envelope slowly, like I was examining a piece of trash I didn't want to touch. "Fine," I said. Ben faltered. Renee tilted her head. I could hear her whisper, "Told you she wouldn't put up a fight. She's too soft." But they didn't know. They had no idea that silence could be sharp, that behind my calm was a storm. I picked up the papers, turned on my heel, and walked into my studio without another word. Once the door shut behind me, I stared at the wall. My hands trembled, not from heartbreak, from fury, rage at myself for trusting so blindly, for giving 17 years to a man who saw me as dispensable, for keeping a woman in my life who smiled through every knife she drove into my back. I dropped the papers on my drawing desk and sat down. The silence in the room wrapped around me like armor, and then, piece by piece, I started to remember. Renee and I met in junior year. She had that kind of laugh that made boys turn their heads, and she knew it. I remember the first time she said it like a joke that wasn't funny. "I prefer men who are already taken. They work harder to keep secrets." Back then I thought it was a silly line, but it wasn't a joke. It was her philosophy. Still, I let her in. When I fell for Ben in our college art seminar, Renee was the first to know. I remember confessing it to her in the library. She had smiled and said, "Oh, Lila, you always pick the good ones. Lucky you." But looking back, I think she already had plans. Their affair didn't start with fire. It was slow and strategic. When Renee's marriage began to falter, Ben offered to help, drove her to appointments, checked on her late at night. He said it was just kindness. I told myself that too. But when I saw him send her a text with a heart emoji, I knew. I just didn't want to admit it. I looked down at the divorce papers, then opened my laptop. I emailed Melissa Langston, my attorney, the same sharp-tongued woman who'd protected my illustration rights for years. "Melissa," I wrote, "I need you to review all assets under my name. And also, we're going to need that prenup." That night I pulled up my old banking portal, the one Ben didn't know existed, the one tied to my royalty checks from the books he never bothered to read. The numbers glowed on the screen, 6 figures. Enough to crush him. Let them laugh now, because they'll never see what's coming. It was a gray afternoon when he showed up, no call, no warning, just the sound of a knock, steady and firm, on the back door of my studio. I opened it, and there he was. Graham, Renee's husband, or at least he had been. We hadn't spoken in over a year, not since their marriage began, quietly unraveling the way thin fabric pulls apart at the seams. He looked older than I remembered. Not in the face, but in the eyes, like someone who'd been living underwater, holding his breath too long. He didn't smile, just nodded and stepped inside when I moved aside. Coffee I offered out of habit. He shook his head and held up a leather folder instead. I think you should see this first. We sat at my drawing table. He laid the folder down like it was made of glass. I hesitated, hands folded in my lap, as if touching it might break something sacred. I hired a private investigator, he said simply. 3 months ago. My heart skipped. My mouth went dry. Still, I said nothing. Just opened the folder. Inside were dates, photos, receipts, hotel bookings, surveillance stills showing Ben and Renee stepping into the same suite over and over. One shot him holding the door open, her looking up at him with that smile I used to think was just for me. There was even a time-stamped video, still 6:42 a.m., both leaving the building, him holding her bag. I didn't cry. I didn't flinch. The truth had already been carving itself into my chest. This was just the final cut. Why are you showing me this? I finally asked. Graham looked at me, his expression unreadable. Because I know what kind of woman you are. Quiet, dignified. The kind who doesn't blow up the world even when it's collapsing around her. I blinked, unsure if it was a compliment or a curse. And because I think Elise deserves better, he added, his voice tightening. She's caught in a lie she doesn't even know exists. That name Elise hit differently. Renee and Ben's godchild. The little girl I'd helped raise, tutored in art, sung to sleep during sleepovers at our house, and possibly Ben's biological daughter if the rumors were true. A child with a soft smile and a laugh that reminded me painfully of what family used to feel like. What are you planning to do? I asked carefully. Nothing. Not yet, Graham replied. She's too young. She won't understand. Not now. I nodded slowly. Then we wait. He looked relieved to hear me say it. But we won't stay idle, I added. We gather everything, every piece, every crack. His eyes met mine, and I saw the flicker of agreement, like two soldiers forming an unspoken pact. We would not explode. We would outlast, outthink, outmaneuver. Over the next few weeks, we worked in silence. I tracked Ben's strange purchases, matched hotel stays to his business trips. Graham dug through Renee's cloud backups. Every file, every email we shared without a word wasted. On the surface, nothing changed. Ben still drifted between homes, still wore that practiced smile. Renee still played the role of charming single mom waving at neighbors hosting brunches. But beneath it all, we were watching, preparing. I would sketch during the day, work on my new book, and by night, I'd sit with a glass of red wine and comb through spreadsheets, texts, financial statements. My hands, once used for soft colors and gentle lines, now mapped betrayal in ink and numbers. Sometimes Graham would stop by with pastries or Elise's latest school drawing, using her as the perfect cover. She thought we were just catching up, just old friends. But every meeting was another chess move. We never talked about revenge, only truth, only timing. And somewhere deep in my chest, that slow fire began to glow hotter. This wasn't about just exposing them, it was about reclaiming everything they thought I'd quietly give away. The diagnosis came wrapped in sterile white walls and the low hum of fluorescent lights. I hadn't even been sick, just went in for a routine checkup. A quick ultrasound, a raised eyebrow from the technician, a long silence that made the room feel colder than it was. There's a mass on your ovary, the doctor said, gently holding the scan up to the light. Likely benign, but large. We'll need to remove it. Surgery soon, then hormone treatment. I nodded. I didn't ask questions. Not because I wasn't scared I was, but because fear had become something I folded up and kept in my coat pocket. I knew how to carry it without dropping anything else. That night I stood in the hospital's east corridor, watching the lights blur through the rain-streaked window. I dialed Ben's number. 6 rings. Then his voice casual, distracted. Yeah, I paused. I'm being hospitalized. It's it's health-related. A beat. Then I'm really slammed right now. Maybe I'll swing by if I get a break. I heard laughter in the background. I knew that laugh. Renee. I hung up without another word. 3 days later, I was wheeled into a pale blue recovery room with IV tubes in my arms and a dull ache blooming across my side. My sketch pad lay beside me. I couldn't draw yet, but I kept it close, like a lifeline to the part of me that still felt like myself. No calls, no flowers, no visits from Ben. But Graham came. The first time he arrived with a box of almond croissants and a thermos of jasmine tea. No small talk, no pity. Just placed the food on the tray and sat beside me like we'd done this 100 times. You didn't have to come, I said, my voice groggy. I know, he replied, but I wanted to. We didn't talk much that day. He told me about Elise's science project, a volcano made from clay and baking soda. How she'd wanted to paint the lava bright pink because real lava is boring. I smiled weakly. Sounds like something she'd say. Graham came again the next week, this time with books, a few mystery novels and a copy of one of my older illustrated stories. She still keeps this by her bed, he said, holding it up. Says the fox reminds her of you. That got to me. I blinked quickly, biting back the tears. Not because of the pain, but because Elise still remembered, still cared. The third time Ben showed up, it was a joke. He walked in with a plastic grocery bag and an air of obligation, tossed some bananas and a half-wilted bouquet onto the table. They didn't have those herbal things you like, he mumbled. I looked at the fruit. I'm allergic to bananas. He shrugged. How was I supposed to know that we'd lived together for 17 years? But I didn't say it. I just turned my head toward the window. He didn't stay long. Said something about work. Renee was waiting in the car. His phone buzzed and he glanced at it before stepping out. As the door clicked shut, the silence in the room felt like a gift. Later that evening, Graham returned. Sat quietly while I colored in the margins of a new storyboard draft, even though the IV tugged at my arm with every stroke. You know, he said, you're handling all of this better than most people I know. I've had practice, he murmured. Pain doesn't surprise me anymore. He didn't try to comfort me with platitudes, didn't tell me I was strong. He just listened. And in that quiet, something unspoken passed between us, an understanding built not from shared romance, but from scars that didn't need explaining. For the first time in weeks, I slept through the night. Not because the pain was gone, but because someone finally showed up and stayed. It happened on a Wednesday morning just after the sun cut through the clouds over my small apartment. I was still healing, moving slowly, drinking lukewarm tea at my window, when my phone buzzed with a number I hadn't seen in months. Ben. I stared at the screen. He called again, then again. By the 18th missed call, curiosity beat exhaustion. I answered. Hello? He was screaming. Lila, what the hell is going on? I pulled the phone back, his voice sharp and ragged. There's a foreclosure sign in front of the house. People are knocking on the door saying we've got 72 hours to vacate. You can't do this, it's our house. I closed my eyes, a small smile creeping in. No, Ben. It's not our house. It's mine. Always has been. He fell silent. I paid the down payment. I continued calmly. I paid every mortgage installment, every tax, every repair bill. Your name isn't on a single page of that deed. You can't be serious, I'm completely serious, I said, cutting him off. You just never noticed because you were too busy pretending your name had value. I heard something crash on his end, then muffled Renee's voice. She can't do this. We're a family. I put the call on speaker and leaned back against the pillows. A family, I said flatly. A family built on lies and convenience. A family where one person plays wife, the other plays lover, And both pretend betrayal is just bad timing. Renee hissed, "You're being cruel." "No," I replied, voice like ice. "I'm being clear. I'm done playing the accommodating ghost while you two devour the life I built." Ben tried again this time, in a lower, pleading tone. "But you always said you'd support me financially. Emotionally, you promised." I almost laughed. I promised nothing. "And if you still have a copy of our prenup, maybe take a look at Clause 12. All property acquired before marriage is exempt from division. And that house, I bought it 2 years before we said, 'I do.'" The silence on the other end was deafening. Then Ben murmured, "But you don't even have a job. Where did you get the money?" Now came the best part. I reached for my tablet and pulled up my banking app. The numbers glowed bright, regular deposits from Harper Lane Publishing Story, Nest Studios, and 2 other top houses. My royalties, my life's quiet work. "Since you're asking," I said, "I made a little over $498,000 last year. Children's books. Remember those silly sketches you used to roll your eyes at?" "You're lying," Renee muttered. "I'm not." I swiped to another screen and snapped a photo of the balances. "This is just one of my accounts." Ben's voice cracked. "So all this time, you were rich?" I chuckled, not from joy, but from release. "No, Ben, I'm successful. There's a difference." He tried to scramble to regain footing. Okay, look, we've all made mistakes. But maybe now that you're in a better place, maybe you can help us just until we get back on our feet." I cut him off. "You left me for someone who used to call my work scribbles. You dragged her into my home and asked me to fund your betrayal. You don't get to circle back now." He tried again. "You don't have to be vindictive, I'm not," I said calmly. "I'm just done." I ended the call. 10 minutes later, my lawyer emailed them both formal eviction notices and attached the complete financial trail ownership records, prenup clauses, even dated bank statements. I didn't want revenge. I just wanted them to realize the silence they once mocked was actually strategy, and they'd never hear it coming. It was Logan's mother, Margaret, who called me. Her voice trembled on the phone. "Lila, can you come? Something's wrong. Elise, she's asking for you." I hadn't stepped foot in that house since the day the betrayal was laid bare, but Margaret and her husband had always treated me with grace, even when their son didn't. And Elise. If she was asking, I wouldn't keep her waiting. When I arrived, the house felt tense. The air thick, like a thunderstorm waiting to break. I walked through the door and saw them, Ben, pacing, Renee perched on the arm of the couch like a queen without a throne, and in the corner, Elise. She stood arms crossed, face pale, but eyes fierce. She looked older than 15. Maybe it was the way she held herself, shoulders stiff like a soldier preparing to speak. "Lila," she said softly. "My name. Not Miss Lila, not Mom's friend. Just Lila. Elise." I nodded, unsure what I was walking into. Ben tried to interject. "This doesn't concern. It concerns me." Elise snapped, her voice sharp and certain. "I'm not a child anymore, and I'm tired of pretending everything's normal." Renee stood, trying to move closer. "Elise, sweetheart, let's not air dirty laundry in front of outsiders." "She's not an outsider," Elise interrupted. "She's the only one in this room who ever treated me like I mattered." The silence was instant. You could hear the clock ticking on the wall. "I've stayed quiet because I didn't know what was going on," Elise said, voice trembling slightly. "But now I do. I've heard the whispers, seen the texts, watched the way you two look at each other like I'm just a prop in your performance." "Elise!" Renee tried, eyes wide. But Elise wasn't done. She turned to Ben. "And you were supposed to be the one who showed me what love looks like. Instead, you treated me like a secret. You never came clean. Not to me, not to Mom, not to anyone. And Lila." She turned to me again. "She never once made me feel unwanted. Even when you disappeared, even when Mom was too busy making scenes, she was there. I felt something lodge in my throat. Her words weren't rehearsed. They were raw. Real. Elise, I began carefully. I need to tell you something. Something I should have said a long time ago. She looked at me, eyes wide open. I've known you were Ben's daughter since you were a toddler, I said. I overheard a conversation once between Renee and her doctor. I confirmed it, but I never told anyone. Elise blinked. Why? Because it didn't matter, I said softly. What mattered was making sure you had a childhood without chaos. I didn't want the truth to rip you apart. You needed safety, not scandal. Renee gasped. So you lied? No, I said, turning to face her. I stayed silent. To protect the only innocent person in all of this. Elise crossed the room and hugged me tight. She buried her face in my shoulder and whispered, I always wondered why you felt like home. Ben opened his mouth, but his father Charles raised a hand. Don't, he said sternly. You've done enough. Elise pulled back and looked at me. You're my mom, maybe not by blood, but in every way that counts. I held her face in my hands, brushing back a tear. Then that's all that matters. The room was still. No more arguments, no more deflections. Just one truth standing tall in the quiet, and it came from a 15-year-old who chose love over lies. Just as the tension began to settle after Elise's declaration, a voice from the doorway cut through the silence like a blade. Sorry I'm late, Graham said, stepping into the room. Figured I should show up to complete the cast. Every head turned. He stood tall, dressed in his usual understated style charcoal sweater, worn leather boots, but his eyes were sharper than I'd ever seen. There was no smile on his face, no warmth, just steady purpose. Renee stiffened. What are you doing here? I came to clarify a few things. Graham said calmly, lifting a small folder from under his arm. Since we're airing out the truth today. Ben rolled his eyes and leaned back against the mantel, arms crossed. Oh, great. The jilted ex is here to lecture us. What you want applause for showing up? But Graham ignored him. He walked straight to the center of the room and placed the folder on the coffee table. Then he looked directly at Renee. You never finalized the divorce. He said each word pronounced like punctuation marks. The papers you sent me last year? They were just drafts. No signature from a lawyer, no court stamp. Nothing was filed. Renee's face turned bone white. Graham tilted his head. So legally, you're still my wife. A stunned hush fell over the room. Even Elise's mouth parted slightly in shock. Ben laughed, harsh and loud. You've got to be kidding me. You're hanging on to paperwork, man. That's pathetic. But Graham wasn't fazed. He opened the folder and pulled out a printed bank ledger, flipping through it. I wouldn't call it pathetic, he said smoothly. I'd call it responsible, especially since this woman he gestured toward, Renee, has been selling off jointly owned property. Gifts from our wedding, even stocks I invested in years ago. What I asked startled. Yeah, he said, handing the papers to me. She's been using the money to bankroll Ben's real estate ventures, including that flop in Beaverton. Renee's lips parted. Graham, stop, no, he said firmly. Not this time. You siphoned off shared assets. You thought I wouldn't notice because I was too quiet. But I've been documenting everything, and now the court will too. Ben stepped forward, indignant. You think that's going to scare me? Come on, Graham, you've always been soft. She left you. Deal with it. I stood then slow and deliberate and reached into my bag. This isn't just about Graham, I said, my voice calm and even. It's about truth, so here's mine. I pulled out my tablet and opened my banking app. Then I turned the screen toward Ben. 3 steady streams of deposits. Harper Lane, Story Nest, Little Birch Books. Each transaction documented like clockwork. I swiped once more, showing the balance. $376,000 in that account alone. Ben's smirk vanished. I have 3 active publishing contracts, I said, never raising my voice. 4 best-selling series. An animated adaptation coming this fall. Last year's income, $500,000, Liz. Renee took a step back. Her mouth moved, but no sound came out. All that time you mocked my little drawings. I continued. I was building a career you couldn't even comprehend. Ben's face reddened like he was trying to speak but couldn't form the words. I leaned forward slightly. While the 2 of you played pretending I was useless, pretending I'd stay quiet, I was building a life so secure neither of you could touch it. Graham smiled faintly, and I was collecting receipts. Ben muttered something under his breath, but no one listened. Because in that moment the power in the room had shifted. The 2 people who once thought they'd crushed us were now standing in the rubble of their own lies, and for once it was them left speechless. For a moment the room stood suspended in silence. Graham's words still hung in the air, the numbers I'd revealed like thunder after a long, low rumble. Ben had backed into the corner arms, slack at his sides. Renee Ava, as she used to be to me, looked like someone staring at a shattered mirror, unsure which broken piece to pick up first. Then she stepped forward. Lila, she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it, almost trembling. I know we've had our differences, but maybe now, after everything, we could find a way back. You were my best friend once. That has to mean something. I looked at her, the woman who used to braid my hair before school dances, who once whispered secrets under the covers, who years later walked into my home and stole what little peace I had left. I never stopped believing in that friendship, I said, my voice low. Even when you gave me reasons to. Even when I knew you were lying. Her eyes flickered. Then why can't we try again? Because I don't trust you, I replied simply. And trust isn't something you get to reclaim just because you miss what you broke. She flinched just slightly. People make mistakes, Lila. You didn't make a mistake, I said. You made a choice. Over and over again. And the only reason you're reaching out now is because the fantasy you built is crumbling. Renee's lips parted like she might argue, but no words came. I stepped closer, just enough for her to hear every word. A friendship that gets sold out for attention, for ego, for convenience, that's not something I want back. I don't hate you, but I don't owe you anything anymore. Her face fell, and that's when Ben finally moved. So this is it, he said, arms raised in mock disbelief. You're just going to walk out of here like you're the hero. No, I said, turning to him. I'm not the hero. I'm just not the fool anymore. He let out a bitter laugh. You think money makes you untouchable? No, I said, smiling faintly. But independence does. At that moment, Elise walked toward me, her steps steady, unwavering. She took my hand in hers, warm and sure. Are you ready? She asked, looking up at me with eyes full of clarity. I nodded. Where do you think you're going? Ben called after us, desperation finally cracking through the arrogance. She's my daughter. Elise turned to him. No, I'm my own person, and I'm choosing the one who never lied to me, who stayed even when you didn't. He froze. We turned and walked to the door. I didn't look back. Outside the wind was cool. The air smelled like rain had just passed. Elise held onto my arm, leaning gently against me. Behind us, the house remained loud with silence. You okay? I asked softly. She nodded. I feel like I just set something down I was never meant to carry. I squeezed her hand. Me too. We reached my car. Graham had followed us out, giving us space, but watching like a quiet sentinel. I turned to Elise. You sure you want to do this? I'm more sure of this than anything I've ever felt, she said, eyes shining. I opened the door and she climbed in. As I sat behind the wheel, engine humming to life, I glanced at the rear-view mirror one last time. The house that once held so much power over me now looked small, ordinary, and filled with people who had lost everything they thought they'd stolen. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt free. And for the first time in years, I didn't need to explain that to anyone. News traveled faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks of that final confrontation, Ben was stripped of his position by his father Charles. The same man who'd once smoothed over his son's mistakes now stood in the family's boardroom and declared, "From now on you earn everything, starting at the bottom." Ben's title was revoked, his office cleared out, his name removed from all pending projects. By month's end, he was assigned to a development crew on the Oregon Coast Manual Labor. 4 a.m. call times, cold sea winds, rusted iron bunks, and no Wi-Fi. I didn't answer his calls, not out of pettiness, but because there was nothing left to say. As for Renee, her fall was harder and lonelier. The court proceedings moved quickly, especially once Graham's legal team submitted the financial records, the divorce documents, and Elise's own statement. She lost custody completely. No visitation unless Graham approved it, which he didn't. She moved into a run-down motel on the edge of town. Took up 3 jobs, waitressing deliveries, stocking shelves on weekends. Once a woman who lived to curate an image, she now existed in borrowed uniforms and greasy shoes. Elise didn't ask about her much. When she did, it was always soft. Do you think she ever loved me the right way? I think she tried, I'd say gently. But sometimes, trying isn't enough. Not when love is supposed to feel safe. My health, meanwhile, began to stabilize. The hormone treatments were grueling, but the scans improved. My doctor smiled for the first time in months. You're responding well. If we stay on track, you'll only need light monitoring by fall. It was the kind of news that didn't make me cheer, but made me breathe. Deep and clear, like the first breeze after a storm. I moved back into my apartment. It was quiet, bright, filled with books and brushes. My studio became my sanctuary again. I returned to my illustrations, slowly, first for comfort, then for purpose. The world I'd once created for children, talking animals, magical forests, glowing stars now helped me heal. Each stroke of color pulled me further from the past. Elise visited every week. She'd bring pastries or sketch with me on weekends. One Saturday, as we sat with our feet tucked under blankets, she held up one of my older books and said, "You ever think about translating these into what I asked?" Amused. "French," she replied, "or Spanish, maybe Korean. I want other kids to read them, even the ones on the other side of the world." "You're learning French now." She grinned. "I want to be the one who translates them, just for you." I laughed through the lump in my throat. Then I guess I better keep writing. Graham kept his distance, at first always respectful, never assuming. He still brought over fresh bread, still asked about my progress, still helped Elise with school projects. Then one spring evening, just as the sun dipped low behind the apartment, he came to my door, holding a small bouquet of lavender. "I've been thinking," he said. "If life hands you a second chance, I don't want to waste mine." "Lila, would you want to start again?" "Not from the past, but from right here." I didn't answer right away. I stepped forward, took the lavender from his hand, placed it in a vase on my desk. Then I turned to him and asked, "Would you wait for me?" He nodded once. "As long as it takes." That was enough. Not promises. Not romance reborn in grand gestures, just time, respect, consistency. The next morning I opened the windows wide in my studio. The sun spilled across my sketch pad. I dipped my brush into gold ochre and painted a wide open sky. Then slowly I began to draw a new story, not about betrayal, not about revenge, but about a woman who chose herself and finally found peace.